Welcome to the Oracle Data Integrator to DBT conversation. We're putting this one out there because there has been a lot of talk about how the Oracle data integration BI community is actually looking at the modern data strategy. And of course, many customers are taking a look at additional technology that can help them be more modern, be more efficient. And one of the tools that has emerged over the last decade is a product called DBT. So this is going to be fairly insightful for anyone who's worked with Oracle Data Integrator in the past. And DBT is a newer product, as mentioned, that adds a lot of feature functionality, but also solves a problem with traditional ETL tools. We're going to go into a little bit about how DBT could effectively empower a data team or data developers inside of an Oracle shop, and looking at Oracle Data Integrator, ODI, because that is the primary data integration tool used by Oracle customers. We're going to do a quick overview. We're then going to do a high level of DBT versus ODI, and then just end with some thoughts on how an organization that might not have ever heard of DBT could engage, and how it's going to empower them and potentially make their lives easier in some situations and certain scenarios. And so this is not, the agenda here is not to be for ODI or for DBT. It's rather to inform data engineering professionals, data teams, VPs of IT, people who are familiar with Oracle Data Integrator, and help them understand some of the value that some of the newer technology is bringing to the table that could really facilitate change or improvement in the way their team develops with ODI, but also develops with data and integration in general, especially as newer products come into the market that an organization wants to integrate with. And it could cause some pain internally having to attempt to use ODI in certain situations where there just potentially is not an integration available, and where something like a DBT strategically could be a better fit. So I think many of us are familiar. We've entered into this realm of a new era in data and how data is managed, and some of the tools that have been developed with a lot of innovation within the last decade, a lot of that within the last 6 years. And so we won't do a deep dive into what people are referring to as the modern data stack or the modern data era. We're rather just going to kind of focus at a high level of what we think this means to the community at large. And one of the key takeaways from this particular slide here is that data integration and data warehousing are still alive and well and valuable to every organization, every business that's out there today. No matter what the hype cycles are right now, no matter what the newest buzzwords are, the ability to integrate disparate, heterogeneous data sources across the business is extremely not only fundamental, but extremely valuable. And none of this can be completely automated away today. And so you're always going to need resources, and you're going to need teams, and you're going to need smart, intelligent people to be able to do this. And also, data warehousing is still 100% relevant. Even if you've heard about, again, Hadoop has been out there for a long time at this point, right? That was supposed to be the great big data capability with the HDFS and so forth. And Meanwhile, for decades, data warehousing has been relevant, providing that curated data set that's going to allow the organization to have a single source of truth, that's going to allow them to have relevant, consistent key performance indicators and metrics that they run the business by. 100% relevant. So the tools that we use to do these type of efforts um, are also relevant, and that is why Oracle Data Integrator still has some relevancy. And what we're going to highlight here is a tool called DBT, and really, again, this is not going to be a versus. This is going to be more of a little bit of a comparison. But if you're an Oracle shop and you're looking to improve how you manage your data, how you work with your data integration, how you're building that data warehouse, this is where DBT could be a value add to either existing footprint, or if you're looking to move away from a system or completely start something from scratch, particularly a new effort, then DBT could be a place where you want to start on day one. So when we think about this modern data strategy era and the tooling that goes behind it, just like data integration and data warehousing are still 100% relevant, we need to look across a few different areas. And so we're just highlighting a few of those for us today. So that's storage. Traditionally, that's object storage. So we know that Amazon S3 has really been the team that started a lot of that conversation. And again, we have many companies out there, pretty much every vendor, Oracle included, has some type of object or blob storage. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about storage. Again, this could be database storage, but we're using this in reflection of object storage. Then, of course, you have the arguments of streaming versus batch. And this is relevant to DBT. It's also relevant to ODI because we want to be able to get data into our platform so we can begin the data integration, begin building that data warehouse, or begin providing some third party or some outbound orchestration of our data. So typically when we talk about streaming or batch, we might be talking about the ingestion, but we could also be talking about the egress of that data using this tooling as well. Then ingestion, obviously, is part of that, as I mentioned, and there's some nuances that could be involved there as well. And again, both of these tools we're talking about, DBT and ODI, can leverage the ingestion process. Then transformation. So when we talk about DBT here in a minute, you'll see that DBT is really all about the transformation part. It doesn't actually ingest any data from disparate data sources like ODI can. It's more about that transformation layer. And when we talk about DBT, you'll see how this becomes extremely important, how the DBT system handles the transformation process, wherein ODI or Data Integrator, you might have lots of different aspects of Data Integrator that have different functionality within the overall system, whereas DBT is really just focused on that transformation component in and of itself. And then, of course, we talk about analytics, so the egress or the consumption, the pedestrian consumption, or even the dynamic self-service consumption of that transformed data. And then, of course, you can't talk about data these days without talking about machine learning, artificial intelligence, or generative AI. And so for anyone consuming this information, this event here today, all these are relevant aspects of obviously ODI, but also DBT because DBT has a core foundation and centralization aspect to itself, which touches on these key items of what's involved in the modern data strategy era. So let's quickly look at Oracle Data Integrator. I think even though this is a conversation about Oracle Data Integrator and the existing teams that use Oracle Data Integrator, it might be fairly enlightening for a lot of the newer, less experienced data engineers that use DBT as their first choice because it's been ingrained in their learning since they've become familiar with the power of integrating data. And so if we refer to this new class of developers as data engineers, DBT over the last, let's call it 6 years, has become a profound choice of data integration, data transformation tooling um, in the space. And so that's kind of a go-to tool for a lot of companies, a lot of resources. Now there are other tools that are similar to DBT. Just to name them for a second here, one that is owned by Oracle, or sorry, owned by Google rather. And then there's also a few other tools out there like Coalesce. And so these tools really focus on that transformation layer. And they all do a little bit more around data management as well, not to just stymie them and have them with a pure myopic view. So when we talk about Data Integrator, let's go back to Data Integrator. That is really Oracle's flagship data integration product. Large legacy relevancy here to applications that Oracle has sold over the last decade for sure. Could even be embarking into the 2 decade space, where you have products like Oracle BI applications, just to name a few, that depend on Oracle Data Integrator, at least 12c, very, very deeply. And so there's thousands of deployments of Oracle BI applications using Oracle Data Integrator. And it's a well-formed, well-thought-out ecosystem. And Oracle Data Integrator integrates with numerous drivers and databases. Um, Integrates with Golden Gate, Oracle Golden Gate, if you're familiar with that product, which gives a lot more of that streaming capability, especially coming from some of the core Oracle database systems. Then, as I mentioned, Oracle BI applications, which has a profound Rolodex of pre-built analytical capability, as well as data transformation capability. And then there's quite a few knowledgeable resources out there that really know Oracle Data Integrator and the Oracle infrastructure, the Oracle architecture, and they're steeped in it. So these are systems that run, Fortune 5,000, Fortune 500 businesses are using Oracle Data Integrator. And my point that I'm driving home here is that Oracle Data Integrator is a fairly substantiated presence within a lot of data teams across the world. Now, when we talk about the product Oracle Data Integrator, it is mainly a graphical interface. Now, there are some agent capabilities for orchestration, but what I'm referring to mainly here is from a studio perspective, right? A user interface perspective. If a resource goes in and they're going to build some sort of data integration with Oracle Data Integrator, it's going to be through the Oracle Data Integrator Studio typically, and that is a user-based interface, right? So you have to have that client interface that is kind of germane to the overall process in its distributed architecture. It's not really a SaaS-based platform. And so we have to think about some of these things as we are either developing with the product or thinking about integrating other products with this product as we move forward. So when you think about Oracle Data Integrator, it is that more of a historical legacy kind of footprint, which is okay. Just knowing that in the modern data strategy era, there's more of a movement towards SaaS-based or platform as a service-based tooling. And so when we look also at things like how do we extend Oracle Data Integrator if we have potentially some other data sources that don't align with the integration aspect of ODI out of the box, or if we want to extend it by way of templating or other ways of looking at our data for simplification, there is the ability to use additional libraries or functions inside of the platform. So that's helpful to us as developers so that we can scale the platform. But once again, when we look at the ability to interact, we're using some type of studio. Then, of course, there is a database repository that's also required for ODI to maintain the configuration of the system itself. And so that's another little bit of a layer on its footprint. then you can see here from a breakout of how the operator, the designer are working, how jobs are submitted. So the orchestration itself is part of this architecture that has to be known by the resources that are maintaining the Oracle data integration system. If we turn our lens to DBT, just briefly, again, all high level, just really kind of talking about it. The next couple of slides really kind of go into our thoughts around this and the capability that we think is really important as we look at Oracle customers and Oracle shops and get them to thinking on how could things be done differently and or better. And so DBT is really this tool that kind of came out of the open source agenda. The company behind it has now created a commercial open source offering where they extend some things. Not everything's completely open source, but from that commercial offering. But the core of the product that we're going to talk about is open source. And a number of companies, like I said, have provided a commercial solution on top of the open source product. Now, this is no different, really, if you think about it, for people who know Oracle, where there is the Oracle HTTP server of legacy, which is still used by thousands of companies, by the way, where they really just took Apache HTTP server, which is obviously from the Apache Foundation, very open source, and Oracle just layered a little bit of technology on top of it, and they then provided a support layer, so a commercialized support layer on top of that after they integrated it with their Oracle products. So it's very similar, taking that open source position and then commercializing the product either based on extending the open source solution or just providing some support on top of the open source solution. So it's a well-proven business model. And so DBT, it integrates with a number of different databases, but what we want to focus on is that DBT really acts as that T in ETL or ELT. So just to back up for edification, extract, transform, and load, ETL, where the T is transform, or more of a modern take, which is ELT, extract, load, and transform, and that T again represents transform. Now, the modern ELT is very similar to something that Oracle was doing back in the 2010s, which was to provide a separate staging layer capability where they were actually, instead of running the ETL model full bore, they would actually take some of the source data from example, the ERP system, PeopleSoft, EBS, and they would push that data, or they would have that data in a source schema so that it was more of an ELT function than ETL. So it made for more rapid access to more recent relevant data that could be accessed. So when we think about DBT, again, it's DBT is coming from an organization that's managing the core product, but it accepts contributions from developers all over the world to contribute to that, what they refer to as DBT core. And it's, like I mentioned before, it's become very popular amongst data engineers these days. And what I think is one of the benefits here is that the interface is mainly through code. So you could use something like Microsoft's VS Code Studio, or you could, in simplicity, just use a terminal on your Windows OS or your Mac OS, and you could still develop and code and write your SQL in the platform. Like I mentioned, there are some SaaS capabilities available, but one of the key things here, and is misspelling there, but it really utilizes the concept of source control management, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. Now, this is something that's tremendously important as we move towards this era of DevOps, and development operations is tremendously important in making sure that we have accuracy, consistency of our data. Becomes even more important when you think about things like SOC compliance and that effort, where we are now able to take our code and store it in something like GitHub or Azure DevOps or GitLab, just to name a few. And this allows us to store all of our SQL data models that we might be building acting as our dimensions and our facts inside of a source controlled repository. I'm just going to lean on GitHub for a second, or just Git in general, really. And so this is going to allow us to store that those models and that SQL code. Now, when we talk about extensibility through DBT, and again, I'm not going to go into great detail on this. This is just a high-level overview. DBT also offers, in essence, macros. So just to kind of give a little story. So we worked with a communications firm, and they had legacy SQL store procedures that had existed and just been augmented or extended over 12 years time. And this is a huge enterprise. And these store procedures were in excess, and there were dozens, close to hundreds of these store procedures that were in excess of 5,000 lines of SQL code. Now, just to give a little bit of an idea of the proven case, some of these store procedures were and could be transformed from 5,000 lines of code to 800 lines of code, just because the majority of the SQL logic was really just appending loops of logic inside of a single store procedure. So by condensing the logic of the SQL using DBT macro capability, not only do you get the benefit of store procedure, or sorry, source control management, where you can actually see changes to the code and identify who modified the code, but you're also able to shrink the code. And what we've also found is that in most organizations, even if they use a data integration product that is graphically based, meaning you're connecting a source kind of node to a transformation node to another transformation node, like a union, then a join node, and then eventually pointing to a target node. Most of the time, these data engineers are just going to write SQL behind the scenes anyway. So they're going to try to shorten their work, removing as much of the UI object components as possible, and just trying to find that one component that allows them to write the most SQL possible, or the call of a store procedure, so that it's just in SQL. And so DBT is really SQL based. Some of the functions are based in Python logic and some of the macros, but at the end of the day, it's going to be overwhelmingly SQL based with these macros, giving you that leverage of macro capability. And from there, you can then optimize your SQL code, and you don't have to worry about trying to finagle the system, getting away from the UI components and just writing SQL anyway. So if we look at kind of the DBT layering here, from the left, this would be your data source ingestion using a tool like DLH.io that's going to be able to connect to your SaaS systems like HubSpot or Salesforce.com or Dayforce, or some of the other systems that are out there that are purely SaaS based, but also the databases like SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata, you name it, MySQL, Postgres, and it's going to allow you to connect to those sources using DLH.io, and then you'll be able to use DLH.io to move that data into your database or your cloud data warehouse. So some of the terminology is really getting mixed up these days, but this is really that data repository where your data loader is moving your Salesforce data into what's in essence a staging area inside of your cloud database or your cloud data warehouse. So that could be your Oracle Autonomous data warehouse. It could be an Oracle database. It could be Snowflake. And these days it can also even be something like Databricks. And so now DBT is this main component here in the middle, where once that data is loaded into your data repository, DBT is able to then know that your data is now in that stage area of your data repository. You then run the DBT engine against your models that you've developed, and it'll handle automated testing. It'll handle transforming. It can do snapshots. Obviously, the version controls there, but you can also do things like alerting and logging. And then at that point, you can deploy your transform models into your final fact tables and dimensions. So that'll be your transform data there. That your BI, your analytics tools, your data science consuming um, uh, area can then use that data that's now been transformed through the tool. And so when you deploy this, you're typically going to use some type of system. So DLH.io has a DBT server. The company behind DBT has a what they call DBT Cloud. And so that's going to allow you to leverage that. If you're using the core version, you're going to use something as simple as a virtual machine. And that virtual machine is really just going to be running that operation. It can even tap into when a change has occurred inside of your source control management system, such as GitHub, for example. And once a pull request has been merged into a branch, that can act as the trigger for the DBT process to initiate. All those things we talked about, snapshotting, transforming, automating, testing, and deploying, will happen based on that triggered event. And then ultimately your data is updated or refreshed or built for the first time inside of that final set of fact tables and dimensional models that you might be generating for your traditional warehouse concept. Okay. So very high level, we do plan to do additional events, webinars that really dive into both contrasting these two tools, but also diving deeper into how not only DBT works for Oracle shops, but also how customers who are using Oracle today can actually start leveraging DBT to make their systems more efficient and effective. So if we think through this, on moving forward with this combination of ODI and DBT, we really have to think about current state, the evolution state, and future state. So it is a little bit of a journey, especially if you're coming from ODI directly. Maybe you're using Oracle BI applications, maybe you're using another system that's heavily utilizing ODI today. But just kind of going through this list super quickly, thinking about what workloads could be integrated and moved into DBT today. There's probably a handful. So if you think about all new requests that are coming down the pipeline, maybe that's an example for DBT. Or maybe there's a process that's bloated, like the one I mentioned, where this one communications company had dozens of stored procedures. There were 5,000 lines of code, but by moving those into DBT, you not only shrink them, by massive amounts, so 5,000 lines of code to 500 lines of code, but you're also able to start getting the benefit of that source control management and DevOps. Identifying which workloads are stable and maybe not end of life and they can remain helps you bifurcate where you can start. So maybe Oracle BI applications is not end of life for the next year or so. So maybe you can start planning for that, moving those into DBT, but maybe there's some other things that are more stable. Maybe you're using ODI just as a standalone product to build out other aspects, data marts, or just data integration inside of your company. So maybe that can remain, but you'll focus on starting to build out the Oracle BI applications and break that up and move some of that into DBT. Are there additional technologies that could assist with this in the future efforts? I mentioned DLH.io, DBT. There's some other things. We've had a few customers look at both Teradata and Snowflake as different repositories for some of their Oracle efforts as well. So as they move from on-premise to the cloud, there are just some decision points that could be made there as well. Also looking at time for learning new technology. Is there a company that can come out and train your existing resources? Do you need assistance, really understanding and planning and creating a roadmap? And then also, what other gains are there that can be expected? So just diving in as kind of a business case or some sort of cost-based analysis that says, hey, if we start leveraging some of this new modern data era tooling, what is the expected ROI that we're going to get by either bringing on this new tech stack or removing the old one, right? So what are the results? And then, of course, we think one of the tremendous benefits here is moving into more of a source controlled managed system and utilizing DevOps. And then, of course, continuous integration and continuous deployment, meaning that as you go through this real true application development process, and you're developing it with feature branch capability, you're using a tool like Jira as an example, that's helping manage your project. Your team is developing to tickets. They're fixing bugs based on tickets, and they're developing new features or new requests for data based on these tickets as well. So you've identified who's going to work on it. You've created a feature branch to do that work. And when you deploy it, it goes through a chain of command that is auditable. And that's super important. Really wish we had this 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but it's here now. So how can you take advantage of it? So, well, just wrapping up, thank you guys for the time today. Hopefully you enjoyed this high level overview of ODI and DBT. If you'd like to hear more, reach out to us, share a comment with us, DM us, find us at aicg.com, and we'd be happy to discuss anything that you're doing with Oracle or DBT, or anywhere we can help share our expertise and our learnings with you so that you can be a better and more evolved data-driven organization, especially using these tools at the core development and data engineer level. Thank you guys for your time. Look for our next event.